Whenever you're ready.
Well, let me quickly share my screen. Okay. Can you see my screen with the, okay, cool. Awesome. So, hi guys, thank you so much for, coming on this particular Friday evening, morning, Saturday morning, depending on where you're joining from. I hope to not make it a boring session for you. I've tried a lot to punch in a lot of jokes, maybe more than the content itself, just to ensure that, I'm not, making you disappointed by the boredom. And, maybe the content may be, good enough, but I do appreciate your feedback on the jokes. So I'm going to start with that. So let me get started in the topic. So I think I'm going to talk about how do we design trustworthy AI. And when I was preparing this talk, I couldn't decide how to open. So I asked my AI assistant to write a professional bio, and it confidently wrote that I am a renowned quantum science physicist, professional ballet dancer, and a former astronaut who summited Mount Everest twice. In reality, my greatest achievement is to remember password without clicking forgot password 3 times in a row. So that's the gap, and that's exactly why we are here for this talk. And in all seriousness, I have spent the last decade building products for millions of users across the world who use them daily. I currently work at Adobe on AI for Digital Experience Cloud. So that's the lesser known brother of Creative Cloud, essentially, which is basically the Mycroft to Creative Cloud Sherlock Holmes, if you want to take analogies there. But we build AI that can predict customer behavior with uncanny accuracy, but somehow I still can't figure out how I continue to watch terrible Netflix documentaries at 2 a.m. And that algorithm is still in development. But let's get started with the heart of the matter here. And I want to start with a question, which is how many of you have ever been in a relationship where the other person constantly makes decision for you without explaining why? Type Y in chat, unless the other person is also on the call, in which case you should not. Okay, I see a few Ys flowing in. Now, I want to ask a follow-up question. How many of you are still in that relationship? Type YY in chat. Very interesting. Okay. Okay. So, I mean, exactly the point that I'm trying to make here is that unless it's your parents or you are too patient, you don't expect to maintain a long-term relationship with that person. Similarly, with AI systems, how can we expect users to maintain a long-term relationship which do the exact same thing, which is make decisions for you without explaining why? Um, and let me tell you about a very recent personal AI trust crisis. So last month I was driving. My navigation app decided to route me through what appeared to someone's backyard during rush hour. And I'm not even exaggerating. There was children's swing set involved. The app kept insisting that this is 7 minutes faster than the highway. And a good, obedient human like me followed it. 20 minutes later, after narrowly avoiding somebody's barbecue, I emerged on the exact same road that I could have taken directly. And when I tried to understand why, the app simply blanked at me, saying that I am an algorithm, not your therapist. And this is exactly what researchers call the trust paradox in AI. We have created some complex products and systems that can predict consumer behavior and detect diseases, but they can't explain their reasoning in a way that builds appropriate human trust. And what does that mean? We'll get into details of appropriate human trust. Also, the paradox here is that as AI becomes more powerful and capable of solving complex problems, it actually becomes more opaque and harder to understand, leading to less of trust from the users. And that matters more than most companies realize. So I'm going to throw a stat at you. Sorry for that. But according to Gartner's research, 30% of Gen AI projects will be abandoned by end of 2025. We are halfway there by the end of the year itself. That's almost one third of AI initiatives. And a lack of trust is stated to be one of the leading reasons why. Meanwhile, a Harvard Business Review study tells that companies that implement transparent and ethical AI see 20% higher adoption rates on average from their users. So the message is fairly clear that transparency isn't just nice to have, it's essential for AI success. And so let me talk about this interesting phenomena. So when we are designing AI experiences, we are walking a very tight rope. So on one side, there is a temptation of creating magical, seamless experiences where the complexity completely disappears. And on the other side, there is this need for transparency that builds human trust. I call this magician's dilemma. How much of the trick do you actually reveal? And let me give you an example. So I recently got an email from my fitness app congratulating me for my fastest mile ever. I was pretty excited until I realized that I had left my phone in the car itself, and it is being serviced. Apparently, my mechanic is an Olympic level sprinter. Uh, when I reported this error, the app sends me a personalized training plan based on my mechanic's performance. It was so confident and so precise with analytics, but so completely wrong. This perfectly illustrates magician's dilemma. You may want to ask, Pawan, how does it perfectly illustrate magician's dilemma? I'm glad you asked. The app creators wanted the magic of impressive personalization, but without revealing what's actually happening under the hood. But that magic backfired spectacularly the moment it failed. So without transparency, I lost the trust right away and had to delete the app afterwards. At least when I'm working with a human coach and the human coach is wrong, they can explain their reasoning, even if the reasoning is I wasn't paying attention. Uh, to better understand this challenge, I want to introduce and reference research on AI trustworthiness from organizations such as NIST and European Commission. And this research identifies three major trust barriers that stand between users and AI adoption. The first barrier is called the ability barrier, which is when users can't verify if the AI is actually competent at its task. So, according to trustworthy AI research, users need to understand an AI's ability, its performance, fairness, robustness, capacity to improve. Without this understanding, humans lose trust. So think about your own experiences with algorithmic content feeds, right? Have you ever wondered why is Instagram suddenly full of pottery videos when you have never shown interest in ceramics, right? So without transparency, users invent their own explanations and usually assuming the worst. Second barrier usually is called process integrity barrier, which is when users think they have more influence than they actually do. Frameworks on the trustworthiness research developed by NIST highlight this as essential, which is process integrity. And what does process integrity really mean? It simply means knowing how the AI makes decisions. So users need to understand not just what AI decides and how it decides to. So we have all experienced this with recommendation systems, right? So you give a thumbs down or thumbs up to a video or a song, and the algorithm would seems to say that, hey, that's nice, I'm going to give more of that or less of that, right? So we know how it works. And I remember one of my friends spent 3 months diligently clicking on not interested on all the cooking videos in his Facebook feed. And can I tell you a secret? Let me just check whether he's okay. He's not here. Um, he doesn't cook. He never has. He's never will. He once burned water. I'm not even kidding. He just put water in the pot, forgot about it. The water evaporated, the pot melted. So that person, you're showing cooking videos to that person, and even today he said that he would see all of the videos around magic tikka masala or Maggi tikka masala, or all of the recipes that you would want to make, even after clicking on not interested button. So that tells a lot about how users perceive when the recommendations are served up to them, even if they are not interested in it. So now he only looks into Instagram for Bollywood rumors reels. So now he does not use Facebook anymore. But you get the gist here, right? Users need to have an influence in terms of decision making with AI. It's not just about giving whether you like giving their input, but it's also about seeing how does it influence the actual decision. And third is what I call the intention barrier, which is when AI appears certain, but users can't understand its goals. So this reminds me of one of my ex colleague now who works in international marketing for a reputed brand. So her team implemented an AI translation tool to localize all of the products for international markets. So during a major launch in Japan, I believe, the AI confidently translated this technical specification with what it claimed to be enterprise grade accuracy. And my colleague trusted the translations and proceeded with publishing, only to receive calls from their Japanese partners saying them that some of these critical safety warnings were actually reversed, which means suggesting something that was dangerous. So the problem here wasn't really just the translation error. It was it was more around the system gave no indication that it struggled with technical safety warning, despite presenting its work. And fundamentally there was a misalignment in terms of what AI's actual capability were and the impression of the capability it conveyed. She told me later on that, Pawan, I don't mind a system that needs occasional corrections. Like human transition would do that, do need that too. But I can't work with a system that doesn't signal when it's out of depth, when it is not reliable. So it seemed designed to project confidence rather than accuracy. I think that was an very interesting point that she made. That some of the products are designed to project confidence rather than actual quality of the recommendations itself. So, research on responsible AI tells us that this is a term, and it's a very tricky word. So, I'm going to try. Intention benevolence. Uh, it's not that tricky, but I can't speak uh, that word without actually breaking it up. But essentially, it means that users need to understand what the AI system is trying to accomplish and whether their intentions align with their own interests. So this is also such a critical barrier that we as designers of product need to solve when we are designing for AI experiences. So I talked about some problems and barriers in the first part of the talk, and let me now talk about uh, how do we go from an opaque to a transparent AI product, right? So research from organizations such as Deloitte and Microsoft introduced a concept called trustworthiness cues. So these are signals that communicate the underlying quality of an AI system. So I visualize this as a spectrum, right? On the far left, as you can see, we have a magic 8 ball, which is completely opaque, that provides results but with no explanation at all. So, will I get a job? Shake, shake, shake. Outlook not good, right? So here I get the result, but I don't know why, or there's no explanation around it. The worst part here is that this is still more explanation than what I got from my last 5 rejected job application. But still, this is not the best experience ever. And on the far right, what you could see is what I called an oversharing friend, which is systems that explain absolutely everything about how they work, including the details that you never wanted to know. So let me give you an example. Obviously, this is a crafted example, not a real one. But um, Adobe Lightroom's auto tone feature analyzes your image's histogram distribution and then applies a sigmoid curve to the luminance values of the color gamut through a perpetual mapping algorithm. I mean, I'm just trying to explain the feature. Uh, by the time finishes explaining the feature, your kid would have graduated college and you no longer remember why you wanted to edit the picture in the first place. Uh, Technically, the description and the explanation was accurate, but it was deeply unnecessary. So most of the products essentially need to land somewhere in the middle. Neither of the extremes are really well thought of. But I've seen, this is personal experience, but far too many are stuck on the magic eight side of the end side of the spectrum than the other end. And let me share two real world examples where you would or you might have experienced this. So the left example that you see is from Apple's photo memories. So in 2021, Apple changed their Photos apps algorithm to prioritize creating memories collections based on recognized faces. So what you see here is one of the earlier versions of the product. When they launched it, users immediately noticed something felt off about their automatically generated albums, but they couldn't explain or identify why. Without this transparency, theory spread on tech blogs that Apple was using facial recognition for marketing data or was deliberately pushing certain types of content. So the privacy concerns and user frustrations were apparent simply because they avoided the transparency part when they made the first version of the change. When you see the feature today, you will see there are the memories as well as how did it end up in that particular album. It could be the location, it could be the person, it could be a group of people, but they essentially fixed that after the first version, rolling out the first version of the product. And in contrast, what you see on the right is Dark Sky Weather app, which is now part of Apple Weather, actually, who took a different approach even when they launched it very first time. So instead of showing a rain icon with 80% chance of precipitation at 2 a.m., they show a precipitation chart for the day with confidence intervals that visually narrow or widen based on the prediction certainty. So as you can see on the right side, when the forecast is highly certain, the visualization makes that very clear. And user research showed that this honest presentation of uncertainty actually increased trust in the app because people could make informed decisions about whether to carry an umbrella on borderline days. This is what AI trustworthiness frameworks call a well calibrated trust judgment, which is users understanding both the abilities and limitations of the system. Let me give you a very interesting uh, observation as well. So there is this two ends of the spectrum, but interestingly, research on AI transparency warns us of a pitfall here too. Sometimes showing explanations can actually lead to overtrust. So studies have found that sometimes users equate explainability with capability, assuming if an AI can explain itself, it must be good at its tasks. This is what researchers call, again, a tricky word, but unfounded heuristics, either one of them. But the idea is that this could lead to inappropriate trust. Remember, I talked about appropriate and inappropriate trust at the very start of the call. So let me give you an example, a real world example. So my friend Alex became extremely obsessed with a fitness app that gave extremely detailed explanations for its workouts recommendations. This app would say things like, hey, I'm recommending high intensity intervals today because your HRV or high heart rate variability indicates slight fatigue in your nervous system, or your sleep quality was 7% below optimal, and your recovery metrics should tell you that you should focus on cardio rather than strength. So Alex was absolutely convinced that this is a scientific marvel. He followed the advice religiously, even when he was super exhausted from the workouts, or the recommendations were not aligned with its goals. When when asked why he trusted this app so much, he said that it explains everything so precisely, so it must know what it's doing. But what Alex didn't realize until much later was that the app was using the same generic templates for everyone, just plugging in metrics to sound impressive. When he finally compared notes with other users, they all discovered that they were seeing the exact same personalized recommendations, even though they had different fitness goals and levels. So the app wasn't really analyzing anything meaningful. It was just really good at sounding like it was. But those detailed explanations created such powerful illusion of competence that users like Alex trusted it way more than their own bodies. So it's like a digital equivalent of someone using fancy jargon to sell you snake oil. If they explain why it works and in an impressive manner, surely it might work, right? Um, Last I heard from Alex was developing his own app that gives completely random fitness advice, but delivers it with 100% confidence and unnecessarily complex terminology. He secured 3 rounds of venture capital funding so far. I'm obviously kidding. Uh, Only 2 rounds of venture funding, actually. Um, but based on my experience, building and fixing AI products across industries is is challenging, but there are some themes that we could actually take out of all of these products and experiences, and which is what I called a glass box framework. So these are nothing but 4 principles that would help you build trustworthy AI experiences. Principle first is setting clear expectations. Be honest about capabilities and limitations. So this part addresses what AI ethics expert call the truthfulness condition, which is using cues to honestly represent AI's capabilities rather than overpromising. So this means being upfront about what your AI can and cannot do before users even engage with it. My favorite example of this going wrong is with a friend who works in marketing. Her agency implemented a very popular Gen AI tool, not Adobe Firefly, which was marketed as revolutionary image generation tool. There are many in the markets, by the way. It's not just Firefly. I'm just clearing up. Don't want any trouble. So in training, it was presented as technology that would help marketers create custom visuals for any of their campaign needs. 2 weeks after launch, a designer spent precious time trying to create this AI-powered image generation tool to generate accurate product images for a pharma, which is a pharmaceutical client, believing that the tool would create compliant medical imagery. The resulting image contained very subtle but critical inaccuracies that would have violated regulatory requirements. When they investigated, they realized that this tool was never trained on medical imagery or regulatory compliance standards. It was creating visually impressive images without any understanding on industry specific requirements. So if you think about it, right, this is not a failure of AI's technical capability itself. It was failure to set proper expectations about its limitations when it was being sold. So the fix, before you even show AI results, explain clearly what the system can do, what it can't do, and how it should fit in users' workflow. It's very easy to tell you that, but it's amazingly rare how amazingly rare how it is implemented in practice. Most AI product launches still follow the ancient marketing wisdom, which is promise the moon, deliver a nice photo of the moon, and hope nobody notices the difference until after the quarterly earnings call. But as the users become more AI literate, this approach is as sustainable as my New Year resolution, which is to eat more frequent healthy meals, which is impressive in theory but abandoned by January 3rd. It's not sustainable at all. Let me talk about the second principle, which is show your work or reveal key factors behind decisions. So this particular principle aligns really well with organizations like NIST and European Commission when they call relevance condition, using cues that reflect the underlying model's trustworthiness attributes. This simply means that showing users the primary elements that shaped AI's output. So think back to your math classes, right? When the teachers would say, "Hey, show me your work," they weren't just being difficult. Wanted to see your thought process, not just the answer. So this is very similar with the experiences that we build. I experienced this principle in action at Adobe very recently. So we implemented an AI based customer behavior prediction system that was technically impressive, but still facing adoption challenges. Even though it was super powerful and accurate, nobody wanted to actually use it. And the solution was very simple. We just applied this principle, which is added a feature to show influential factors behind customer behavior predictions. With this transparency, suddenly the perception of AI black box was shattered, and we saw a huge spike in terms of trust and usage within a few months itself. So it's very simple to actually implement this particular principle. But it's another thing to note here is that people don't need to understand every detail of how AI works, but they do need to see some of the key factors that influence its decision. So it's almost like those crime shows, where the detective explains how they solved the case at the very end. Nobody wants to see a 42 minutes of unexplained investigation only to have detectives say at the end, "Trust me, this person did it," and the show ends without any evidence. So same goes with your AI. Nobody wants to be arrested by your algorithm without the understanding what put them on the suspect list. I am so proud of this last line. Wow. Anyway, um, let's move on to the next principle, which is embrace uncertainty, um, being honest about confidence levels. So this connects very well with what AI trustworthiness guidelines call the calibration condition, which is helping users make well-calibrated trust judgments by understanding systems' confidence levels. It is simply meaning that clearly communicating how certain or uncertain the AI is about its output. Um, and let me tell you an example from an Adobe product itself. So, one of my friends, Elena, who works in a video production company at a major media brand, they use Adobe's Premiere Pro, and Adobe Premiere had launched AI-powered auto captioning feature to generate initial transcripts of all of the content. So the original design simply showed editors a completed transcript with no indication of confidence. The problem with that version, some portions were perfectly transcribed, while others had background noise, accents, or terminology which were completely wrong. The problem here was that without confidence levels, editors had to carefully review each word equally, creating a massive inefficiency in the system and the workflow. The underline that you see here on the image is the fixed version of that same functionality. And this underline under the group word shows you that the confidence score need not be an actual score. It could just be an affordance for where humans may need to double check. Right? It does not tell that I'm 100% or 50% confidence. It just gives you an underline saying that, hey, you may want to check this particular word. And inspired by Daniel Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, AI researchers point out something very fascinating here. And I think I learned that after I had this discussion with my colleague. They found that the users of the system actually engaged in two different types of processing when evaluating AI systems. One is the systematic processing, which is slow and careful, while the other one is heuristic processing, which is fast and based on shortcuts. So when we clearly communicate these cues of uncertainty, we help users know when to slow down and actually engage in systematic processing. So in other words, our brain has two modes. First is, let me carefully analyze this. And the other one is, looks all good enough. Without uncertainty signals, we default to the second mode. which explains approximately 90% of my online shopping regrets. But here is the surprising part. Being honest about certainty actually builds more trust than false certainty. When weather apps, we had seen in the previous slide, when weather apps show precipitation ranges, rather than exact percentages, users rate them actually more trustworthy, simply because they know that the uncertainty matches their real world experiences as well. And finally, talking about meaningful control, which is letting users influence the system. This is what frameworks call agency affordance, if I recall that correctly. This means that providing controls that actually impacts the system behavior in understandable ways. And let me give you a quick example for that. So this principle, I saw that personally in one of the apps that I had downloaded, which is a very, again, popular photo editing app that claimed that they have an AI powered enhance feature. It had sliders with vibrancy, detail, and magic. They had a slider on magic. And when I moved this slider, there was nothing happening to the photo. There was no changes. So about for 5 minutes, I played around with the sliders and then I deleted and never opened it. So this was one of the bad examples where even though you give the controls to users, it does not really change the output, which means this principle is violated, and users sort of lose the trust on the app. And contrasting this with what we see in an enhanced feature of Spotify, you might have seen that feature in playlists. When you enable it, it clearly explains that it will add recommended songs interspersed with the existing ones. And it also shows you this one, the right diagram that you see here, the green box that you see, it's an recommended song that is added. So it's a very clear visual indicator of what has been added. And then it also gives you one-click options to remove it or keep those additions, right? So I think this is a good way or a positive way of actually implementing this particular principle. The control should be meaningful, the impact should be visible, and the interaction would then build the trust with the recommendation systems over time. And I think I've talked about these four principles, but let me talk about real world as well. So designing transparent AI is not just a UX challenge. It's actually an organizational battle. So you'll encounter resistance from so many different directions, right? So engineering pushback. So your data scientists and engineers might resist the transparency for valid reasons. I remember a meeting when, I think in the same room actually, where I suggested explaining key factors behind our recommendation engine. And our lead data scientist looked at me as if I had suggested that we publish our source code on the billboards for New York's, Times Square. The, and he told me that, Pawan, this model uses 200 variables with complex interactions. We just can't simplify without being inaccurate. And to be fair, he was correct. Like we can't publish 200 factors, but we had to find a middle ground, which is what we ended up doing. And we didn't explain every variable, but we identified 3 or 5 top factors that influenced each recommendation. It wasn't comprehensive, but it was honest and useful. So, and I think this is an interesting concept where the idea is about expensive trustworthiness cues. So signals that cost something, either time, effort, engineering resources to implement, but that cost is precisely what makes them credible to users. So completely different context. Think of it like buying flowers for your partner, right? Sure, you could text "I love you," but somehow spending $50 on something that would live for 3 days is way more convincing. Expensive signals work. And the key is collaborative education, like helping your technical teams understand that users don't need perfect explanations, but they need useful ones. The other directions of resistance would be business resistance. They would come up with arguments like, hey, transparency will reveal our proprietary method to competitor or highlight flaws in the product or confuse users with too much information. But trust me, we have had these conversations. The only way to solve for that is either run an A/B testing based, do a testing on transparent and black box version and prove that the transparent version is actually going to give you better results we did that back in India when we were working with the financial services. So I think that, but the idea is that you would get these arguments from the business teams, and the only way to prove that is to actually put it in front of customers or users and prove them wrong. And then finally, legal concerns, which is also one of the most difficult ones. So your legal team would raise valid concerns about liability, especially in regulated industries. And getting approval from legal is like trying to convince your parents to let you stay out past curfew as a teenager. So the first reaction is always no, followed by a detailed lecture about all of the worst case scenarios that you never thought were possible. It's exactly the same with legal teams. The key is usually to bring legal team into the design process way earlier so that you can design for those problems rather than afterwards where you are just presenting the designs for approval. So I think this is the trick that has worked for me in the past. Um, and then finally, I think a key point here that I wanted to highlight was it is it is it is nobody's role actually to develop or build this trust inside the product. But designers and product managers, I think, are the mediators between AI trustworthiness and user trust. So you are responsible for crafting these trustworthiness cues that bridge this gap. And I think this is a it reminds me of a classic scene. I think you might have seen any sci-fi movie, right? You see someone has to translate between the logical alien species and emotional humans to prevent an interplanetary war, right? Except saving the Earth, you are trying to stop people. You are trying to get people to stop saying, "Hey, AI hates me," when their vacation trip photos get auto-categorized as wildlife. So this is the exact same thing. And I think this is the last bit of observation that I've had after working with multiple products, that AI trust is actually an evolution process. So it's not a switch, zero or one switch. It happens in levels. So usually the first level is skepticism. So a user would start with this concept of, hey, I don't believe that this will work correctly. After you prove that wrong, or after you build enough trust cues, you move to verification, which is I'll check everything it does. Then you move to calibrated trust, which is I know when to trust and when to be cautious. And then you enter partnership, which is we each contribute what we're best at, right? So each AI product, each user goes through this evaluation. And most AI products never reach past the skepticism or the verification stages because they don't provide the transparency needed to build that calibrated trust. Um, and there is this interesting term called inequality of trust, which is different group of users would have different levels of trust based on the capability, with their own capability, and their motivation to engage with the system. So good design is about addressing these gaps. So not everybody is going to be at the same level, but you have to design for every level of the trust within the experience itself, which is where the real craft lies. And when the transparency is done right, users will develop what psychologists call appropriate reliance, which is they know when to trust AI and when to override it, creating a truly collaborative relationship. So basically, we want AI to treat AI like a weather forecast. Generally useful, occasionally wrong, but you still bring the umbrella just in case, right? We need the exact same relationship between AI and users. And then finally, I am a product manager. I'm going to talk about metrics. So throughout my career, I've identified a few key metrics that are strong indications of healthy human AI relationships. This is not an exhaustive list at all, but it's a very good starting point. Also, you don't need to use all of these metrics for all of the products. You can just use 2 or 3 metrics based on the applicability, based on the experience that you're building and the context. But usually the 5 metrics that I would recommend would be appropriate reliance rate, which is are users accepting or rejecting recommendations when they should. Feature adoption depth, which is are they just using AI features at the shallow level, or actually they are going and using full range of AI features. Thirdly is confidence action correlation, which is do users' actions correlate appropriately with AI confidence levels as well. Trust recovery speed, which is how quickly does usage return after an AI errors, right? And finally, explanation engagement, which is are users engaging with the explanatory elements that you have built. And the unofficial sixth metric is swearing frequency. The fewer times users yell, "What the heck were you thinking?" while using your AI, the better you are doing on the trust front. But that's an unofficial metric. You can't measure that. Um, so just to summarize what we discuss in this session, the glass box framework is about setting clear expectations, showing the work, embracing uncertainty, and giving meaningful controls. And I'm just want to take a look at the time. Okay, let me move here. I'm going to skip the Spotify example again, but let me jump onto the action items from this particular calls. Right, I had promised that you should be able to do something on Monday morning after this session. So I think there are three things that you could do right away, which is firstly audit your explanation. So take the most used AI feature, or maybe the one that you're designing. Either ways, does it explain key factors or does it communicate confidence? The same questions that come out of these principles, you apply it on that particular product. Then you run a confused user test, which is take 5 users who have either abandoned or never used that feature, ask them how they think it works. The gaps and the misconceptions will reveal the transparency opportunities. And then finally, create an explainable or explanation prototype. So for your opaque AI feature that you had initially identified, create a quick prototype and explain its working in simple terms. Test it with a couple of users again. You can use Lovable, Replit, and Bold these days. I mean, the prototype building has become super easy and fast. So you can actually build much more interactive prototypes as well. But run a prototype, like create a prototype and run a test, and see whether you actually fixed it or not. And if you document these three, you have a very good case study in terms of how you can take a untrustworthy product to a trustworthy AI product. And I think finally, I want to end on this note that our goal is not just to create trust, but appropriate trust, which is what I mentioned at the very start of the talk as well. So giving users the right cues to make well-calibrated trust judgments. So imagine using AI tools where you never have to wonder why did it do that, right? Or imagine systems that earn your trust rather than demanding it. And imagine technology that amplifies your capabilities rather than replacing your judgment. So this isn't about better design. It's about creating a future where AI enhances human potential rather than diminishing human agency. Thank you so much for your attention. Let's build AI that people actually believe in because they understand it. I'm I'm happy to take questions or any part of the sessions where you need to double down. Yeah, I'm going to stop share so I can see your faces. Okay, it's Ria's face.
Amazing talk. Thank you so much. Yeah, let's open the floor to some questions. You guys can drop them in the chat or unmute your mic. Anything you want to ask him about what he talked about, his work at Adobe. Yeah, the floor is your guys's.
I'm not expecting any questions. Don't worry, guys. I don't want to put you in spot. I've been in talks and I've listened those talks. But I think if anything that you did not understand, you can also reply on chat if you are shy to maybe ask the question. If not, it's okay. I mean, even if you don't have the question, I'm really a good speaker. So I'm just kidding. Yes. So I see a question here. If you have any AI products in mind, you think hits all of the marks in terms of trust building. That's a great question. There are many actually these days. You pick any of these niche AI niche. So, for example, if you pick, let's say, Lovable, which is like a prototyping or vibe coding niche. I love the Lovable product. If you have actually used and built the products, I mean, there are multiple ways because you're building prototypes, you're building actual products, and you it has front end and back end, and you are basically saying, telling the system that what to build. It is doing a lot of the work on the background, but if you go through the experience, you will realize that it does a great job of not overwhelming you. So you ask something, it is going to do the job in background. You can always expand. So there is an expandable experience where you can see all of the details if you need, which solves for the different levels of the trust that I talked about. But that's not the primary experience. The primary experience is just a conversation experience. And then at the end of the experience, when you build something, if there is an error as well, it does a great job in handling uncertainty, saying that, hey, I did build this prototype, but I think there is a problem here. Do you want me to fix it? So that solves for the uncertainty problem also that we talked about. I think Lovable is an amazing example. I also like uh, uh, Claude is also Claude. I mean, these days, I mean, Claude and Open, like ChatGPT, they all sort of learn from each other. So, I mean, the design language, you will see that it is being replicated across these conversational AI tool. But I think even those tools are top notch because I think that's their key focus in terms of how do I create that trust in the context of a conversation. So I think those products are also North Star for building any AI products that would be deemed as trustworthy. That's a good question, though. Okay, I see another question. What considerations should we take when designing AI products for children? Does the framework remain the same? I mean, if you think about it, right, the framework should not depend on the segmentation or the user group that you're designing it for. Sure, if you're designing it for the children, maybe the bar on the explainability is different than if you were to build for an adult, right? So the way you would solve for the explainability would be different, the cues would be different, the language would be different. But the considerations and the framework would exactly remain the same for all of the users. And I think the fact that you understand that you're building it for children, you already have one level, 1 foot ahead because now we can focus on that group and build a trust for that group rather than trying to solve for the trust problem across groups. Okay, how can you truly uh, ex- create truly explainable interfaces when AI's decision making process is so complex? That's an excellent question. That's a super, and I think that's where I feel the product management as well as designers' job is sort of evolving. So it was always about, hey, how do you design an experience that users understand? But now, in order to make those experiences, you have to go deep down into how it really works. So I think 5 years back, I used to work with designers and they would just care about, okay, tell me what's the experience, what is the outputs, what is the outcome. But that does not work these days. You have to get into details of how the machine learning product, machine learning or whatever recommendation system or Gen AI system that is, under the hood is working because you need that understanding to deliver the experiences that matter. And that's why you saw the circle that I had developed, which was understanding the AI capability, then building for human trust. It started with building that understanding of AI. So I think as people who are getting into design field, this is a great time to enter because you can actually poke around a lot and know more about what is happening in the technology side of things, so that you when you go actually start building the products, you're not starting from scratch. You know basics of how a visual AI model is built or how a recommendation engine is built, so that you can actually explore details of it when you start working on a product. But there's no way out of it. You have to understand the decision making process, even if it's very complicated. It is only when you understand it's so complicated and exactly how you can simplify it for your users. Okay, I see another question. Different types of explanations, and it's important to choose the type of explanation that the user is looking for. Exactly. Models explanation, process explanation, data usage. That is more of a comment. But I guess the good question would be how do you suggest explanation for large neural networks that are very opaque and similar to the above question? That's a good question, actually. So again, depending on model, if you are using neural networks as well, right? I think it's very important for you to figure out some of the problem spaces. Does it need neural networks to be solved? So in some like in some problem spaces, you don't need to be extremely transparent about what is the algorithm that you're using. For example, like the recommendation engine, right? That the recommendation engine that we talk about or that we see on the Instagram side, they're probably using neural networks to figure out what is the right content for you, but they are not bombarding the user by showing them that level of complexity. All they are doing is that, hey, I'm showing you this content because X user, or because you clicked on that thing. So it converts it into a language that the user understands, but it never opens up that complicated box or system that is too complicated for the user to understand. So I think forget about what is powering the experience. If it is a neural network, and if the explanation queues cannot be built, maybe you have to figure out a different way to solve that problem. We have done that. Sometimes better quality accuracy, like better accuracy without explanation is not that good. Worse accuracy with good amount of explanation may be a much better solution, much better approach. In which case you take that approach. And I think that's what we have figured out as well. So don't we don't have to over index on the accuracy part of things. That's what I'm saying. And if you don't over index on the accuracy part of things, you open up more options than neural networks in cases where explainability is as important as accuracy, as explainability. Does that help, Karman? Cool. I think we are at time. Oh, okay. I see a last question. I'm going to take this last one. Can AI be truly ethical if it's trained off users' data or work without their permission? Especially in the art world, you're right. You're absolutely right. I don't think we can be. I think that's why Adobe has taken a stance that there is this you can't train on somebody you can't train on content which is not properly attributed. That's a stance, and I think very few companies such as Adobe have taken that stance. We don't know how the users are going to actually behave. Are they fine with that liberty? Why are the creators fine with that thought process? We're going to only see. Time is going to tell. But I think I agree, like from a ethical standpoint, principle standpoint, and agree with you. There's not a question there, but again, I think it depends on how the industry is perceiving it and how they are building the products, and users, how comfortable are users using those products. That's going to end up defining the standards for whether it's ethical or not. Does that answer your question? I know it does not answer the exact question, but even I don't know the answer to that question, honestly. Cool. I think we are at time, but I think you have been a very engaged. Thank you so much. Very engaged audience, and I hope that you found some interesting, valuable framework that you could actually use when you are designing your products.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. Everyone register for the Protothon and get your projects evaluated by Pawan. Thank you guys so much for joining. That was an amazing talk. Very insightful.
Thank you, team. Bye bye.
And yeah, the recording will be sent out as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.